Welcome to this self-paced series on Introduction to SQL, Structured Query Language with SQLite. What I want to take a moment to do is explain to you why SQLite matters and why this is an important technology for you to be using in your Python projects. One of the important things for you when you're going to be creating Python projects is having a place to store records. So it's important to understand the difference between records and just data. So when we're talking about data, we're talking about files, PDF files, audio files, image files, video files, those types of things. And that is going to go into what is called your data store or your storage array. So basically you're going to have some kind of a bucket or a volume someplace, and that is where all of your files are going to go. But on top of your files, you're also most likely going to need to store records. And so what records are is basically they're a record of an event or something you need to store a specific text-based information about. So let's say you are creating a blog post, right? So a record would be when the timestamp for when that blog post was created, the title of the blog post, the text that is within the blog post, tags for the blog post, that type of thing. That would be in a record. Or think about things like sensor values. So imagine you're creating a project, you're getting sensor values in, and you want to store those values somewhere. That is what you are going to be using a database for. So in some of our classes with Python, we've used something called CSV files, comma separated value files. All these are text files where basically you can store and read records from those. The issue with that is a text file is a text file. It's good for what it's good for, but when you really start needing to deal with records at a large scale, you can get into some really weird stability and other issues. So what a database is going to do for you is that this is going to give you a place that is going to allow you to store these records, make them very easy, very fast to access, allow you to basically sort through those records, find information that you care about, and do a lot of interesting things with that type of data. Now, when we talk about databases, there are a lot of different databases out there, right? There's Postgres, there's MySQL, there's MariaDB, there's MS SQL, there's Redis, there's MongoDB. There's just a huge number of different database systems out there, and which one you will pick for an actual project that you're going to be deploying into the real world will require you to sit down and basically do a lot of paint by numbers. Again, what is actually important to you? How much money do you have? What institutional knowledge does your organization have for supporting different types of database systems? A whole bunch of that type of thing. Well, the thing is here with Silicon Dojo, right, is I'm always trying to teach you things in the simplest way possible, right? It basically trying to strip out all the extraneous things that might get you confused and really focus on whatever topic it is we're trying to teach. So the great thing about SQLite is that there is no what is called administrative overhead. Basically, it has the administrative overhead of a text file. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go and you set up a MySQL server, you actually have to, in fact, set up a MySQL server, right? You have to install MySQL onto your system or onto another system. Basically, you have to go in there. You have to create an account. There's actually security in a MySQL database server. There's something called privileges, allow different accounts to do different things. There's firewall rules that you might have to deal with. There's a whole bunch of stuff there, right? So MySQL or MariaDB or any of these other database systems are incredibly useful, again, in a real production environment where security really matters, right? But again, we're here at Silicon Dojo. I'm trying to teach you basic concepts. And so one of the great things about SQLite is there is none of that. There is literally none of that. When you install Python 3 onto your system, part of the libraries, part of the components that will be installed on your system will be SQLite 3. So that is the database engine. The great thing about SQLite is you literally just call it. You call it, you start interacting with it, and that is it. There's no security, there's no privileges, there's no TCP ports, there's none of that. ugly stuff, that's important when you're worried about hackers and things. And so that's one of the great things about SQLite is when we start creating projects, again, and we're focusing on the specifics that I want to try to teach you. Basically, we can go straight in to having Python interacting with SQL. So say SQL is something called structured query language, interacting with the SQLite database in order to store data and be able to retrieve it really, really easily. Now, the way that I just explained SQLite, you might be sitting there going, crap, Eli is teaching us a toy. I thought when I came to Silicon Dojo, I was going to learn real technology products so that I can take what I learned here and immediately go into an environment and actually start using that to deploy stuff in the real world. Crap, why are we using this SQLite toy? Well, the important thing to understand is SQLite actually really is not a toy. It's just really specific in its use cases, and you just really have to keep that in mind. SQLite is actually the #1 most installed database engine in the entire world. Again, that probably comes along with the fact that it's installed with Python 3 by default, but it actually is the most popular database engine in the world because it is so easy to interact with, right? It's a relational database, and we'll talk about that later. Basically, it means you have a schema and different tables, again, are associated with something called joins. So it's a relational database, again, just like MySQL or MariaDB, Postgres, that type of thing. It's incredibly fast. It is actually reliable, and it is a full-featured SQL database engine. So if all you care about is a SQL, the structured query language, you're going to get all of that functionality that you need. The other thing that's actually also amazing about it too is you can actually create databases up to 240 terabytes in size. So that's going to be one of the things too. Again, whenever you're dealing with any product, it might be, oh, this is great, but it can only get to be so big. One of the cool things with SQLite is, again, if you have the storage arrays that can deal with that size and actually be able to deal with it, that starts going into hardware resources, things we won't talk about in this particular series. Anyways, as long as your hardware resources can actually support it, you can actually get this thing up to 240 terabytes in size. So again, if you're pulling in just a tremendous amount of information from sensors or anything else, you're not going to run into basic limitations with the SQL or with the database. Now, just so you really understand where SQLite or a database engine fits in from an architectural standpoint when you're going to be creating your projects, basically the big thing to understand is generally you're going to have your back-end programming language such as Python or possibly Node.js if you're going off on that route. For us, it'll be Python. Python is actually going to be interacting with your database and sending SQL or structured query language statements to your database, getting the response back. Then Python is going to be able to read that response, and based off of whatever your programming is, it will then be able to do something with that response. So basically, you can interact with SQL, structured query language, just at a shell. So you can actually get into the SQLite shell, and you can do what are called select or insert statements directly from the shell, but that is not how this would technically work in the real world. What would happen is you would actually have Python, which is that back-end language. It would send SQL statements to your database. The database would then run those SQL statements against the database, and then whatever the results are, that would come back to Python. Python would be able to read those results and be able to do something based off of whatever those results are and whatever your coding is. So this is basically just a simple overview to try to get you into the mindset of why SQLite is important. And again, it is an incredibly valuable database engine. You just do have to realize the one limitation it really does have, it is just piss poor for security.